Yeah, so that's amazing. So I kind of want to start at the beginning if you guys don't mind. Like, I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it was after Kiss Lori for Me aired, right? After we published it. I think
Yes.
Dennis, you reached out to me and said, I've got to get in touch with this woman. I think you really enjoyed the episode and you wanted to meet Lori. Is that how it went? I think that's how it went.
Yeah, that's how. And you said, if I send the information, I'll tell her you're not too creepy. And I thought, well,
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still awaiting my framed gift for that in exchange for that.
yeah.
Yeah. So what
Well,
happened? I connected you guys over email. Is that how it went?
well, actually, I asked you for the information. You responded with that snarky remark, and then you
Me?
were busy with other things. And meanwhile, I got impatient, so I started looking at Lori. I looked at the information on the book, but then her, and then I went to the places where people leave remembrances at the wall, and I actually got her contact information. So we didn't need you to do that. You were that's how it happened. And then by the time I said, oh, I talked to Lori, I have her phone number now, and you said, oh, gee, I forgot to tell her that you were going to try to do that. So anyhow,
So Lori, you never got the message that he wasn't too creepy.
I did not. I just he sent me the kindest message, and I think words speak volumes. And so from his message, I determined that he was really a nice guy and very safe.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened then?
we agreed to, we figured out a time where we could talk on the phone, and I just went back and looked at my phone record there, and we talked for over an hour. It might have been an hour and a half that we talked the first time. I'd already purchased the book. I'd already read half of it, but I just felt I needed to talk to Lori. I mean, I want to say to you, I had to talk to Lori, and I had some thoughts about what she wrote, and I thought I need to talk to her. And when I heard the podcast, I was walking in my morning walk, and I don't put earbuds in. I just have my phone in my pocket, and I listened to it. Then I got home, and as soon as I had to run some errands for Joan, I put it back in my car, and I drove until I heard the whole thing again. I listened to it 3 times in the first day. That's how taken I was with everything that she had to say and everything she and her mother went through. It just, of all the podcasts that I've heard, it resonated the most with me. Maybe because of Corman and Marines, part of it. And, I owe my life to Corman, and we lost some Corman on 861. So I honestly, I understand them, and, so that's how I knew I had to try to get in touch. And then the rest is kind of history. So we did talk a few more times, and I ended up saying, Lori, I don't want to cut you off, so cut me off in a second. I said, well, I'm going to be in DC to read names. I put my name in. I'm going to be reading names on that Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday night. And that's around the time when I want to hear some 861 guys, but your dad's name will come up. And Lori responded by saying, well, if you're there to hear that, you're going to see me, because I'm coming down. I'm coming to read the name. I'm reading my dad's name on that Tuesday back in November.
Sorry, Dennis. So Lori, when you first heard from Dennis and you guys had this hour-long conversation, the very first one, I mean, were you prepared for that? I mean, did you think? I'm assuming you couldn't have imagined that conversation would be an outcome of having done the podcast.
No, I still don't completely have the ability to wrap my brain around why this book is impacting 55 to 75-year-old men the way that it is. Dennis is one of many veterans that I've talked to, and every time I see that as this sacred space, right, where for some reason they trust me. And so Dennis shared a lot about his story. And I remember him talking about his trip to Vietnam and the way he memorialized or honored, remembered the men that were killed, and the palm leaves that he released into the air. And as soon as I got off the phone, I went to my husband and said, Eric, you've got to hear this story. And so I didn't anticipate what happened in DC, but the phone call, here this total stranger right, was moved and impacted by my dad's story in a way that I still don't understand, and I still don't know what's gonna come of this. Clearly a relationship with Dennis, clearly a memorable gift that I know we'll get to, but there's something bigger, there's something more. Maybe Dennis can verbalize that better than I can.
I can just say that in listening to those podcasts those 3 times in a row within the space of 4 hours, I just thought, you're telling me I'm listening to a story that is as remarkable as any that are on those podcasts since the beginning, and so personal, especially with the fact your mother and dad kept journals and they saved letters and they have these tape recordings. And, you know, I've got a drawer full of 125 letters from my best friend from high school, you know, so I know a little bit about that part of it. And I just was taken with that. But I also, because within the day I had the book, and whether it was on your, actually listening to your podcast again and again, I knew that whatever and you eventually obviously said that the information your mother had received was inaccurate about where your father was when he was killed. And I knew right away that that story was bogus about kneeling down or laying down next to the captain and another Marine. I mean, and I thought to myself, there's no way on earth that a captain in the Marine Corps who's in trouble is talking to a corpsman about where we are on the map and what we're going to do about it. And that just didn't make any sense, you know, and that's the story you guys were given. And I thought, well, that's horseshit. I mean, I knew that was. And that's another reason why I wanted to reach. And then when we talked, I said, look, I'm gonna underline things in the book and things that and you solved it on your own. You didn't need me to solve that, you know. All that hard work and all those interviews and all those trips that you took talking to those people, you figured more or less out what happened as opposed to what you'd been told officially. So.
Yeah.
And
yeah, but it was nice to have that confirmation from you that, I mean, I had no way of knowing that story wasn't accurate. I just, something in my gut, right? Something within me knew there was more. I had no evidence of that. I have no military history with which to base that on, but it just has felt like there's something driving me. I don't understand how life works, but I know that my dad deserved for us to know the truth, right? As he, without hesitation, responded to Frederick Bungartz and was attempting to save his life. You know, I don't know, in the midst of battle, I can't imagine if he could even think about my mom or I. You know, I cannot imagine with the chaos and the sounds and the crisis at hand. I don't know what his thoughts were, but I do know that he deserved for us to know.
Absolutely.
That what he did up there, we use the word hero, we throw the word around. His selfless act needed to be shared. And so, Dennis, thank you for caring about the story of this man whom you never met and for sharing it with as many people as you have. The success of the book is because of Vietnam veterans sharing it and gifting it and talking about it. And, you know, if my dad could thank you, I know he would be amazed.
Well, he's got to be a proud dad out there somewhere to see, to learn and watch and see what you did, because it's really remarkable. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's a remarkable effort on your part, and it turned into just, I think, a beautiful book. How's the book doing since the podcast?
The book was going really wonderfully. July was the launch. 14 author talk, book signings, Vietnam veterans spotlights. And then I knew I was, you know, the university was coming back to the academic year, and I knew it was going to be hard. And, you know, you say something out loud and you hope it's not true. But I said, I don't think I can continue launching this book or doing this book tour and teaching full time and advising students and all of those things that come with this job. I tried, but truly could not. And so I've given it somewhat of a pause. The book did great all the way through February. I just watched it sort of tank. And so thankfully, I got a sabbatical for the fall. So have the opportunity now to do an audiobook of Kiss Lori for me, a companion children's book that I'm going to be doing in the fall, and then I'm going to do a free ebook to try to help promote the book. So we're going to pick it back up. It was going great, but more than sales, it was the stories. I could go to a book signing and have one event had 120 people, one had 8, right? But the one that had 8 was just as meaningful because I watched Vietnam veterans, some of whom chose to just sit there and not talk, some of whom said, I don't want to talk, and then at the end said, may I talk, right? And family members coming up to me and saying, and to my mom and saying, I had no idea. He never talked about it. But now what I just heard him say out loud is the first time I've ever heard some of those things. You know, our Vietnam veterans telling their stories, that's what this book's about.
So the two of you converged in DC and intentionally, right? I mean, you each knew that the other was going to be there.
Oh, yes. Well, we knew our time schedules, and I actually read a name on Tuesday around noon time of my college roommate's best friend who was killed over there. He was in the Marines. He had 2 weeks left in his tour. He died just before I left to go over there. And my buddy Ralph out in Phoenix, my roommate from the 2 years at ND, said, if you've been killed over there, I don't know what I would have done in my life, because this guy, Michael Hiller, was his best friend from grammar school through high school. And so I lost my train of thought there for a second.
Converging in DC.
You read the name at noon.
Yes. So we made it. So I read the name at noon, and I knew we weren't going to read again. I wasn't going to read again until the evening, because they give you 30 names on the sheet that are alphabetical, not alphabetical, but the way they're on the wall. And so I knew I'd be going back. So when we communicated a couple of times before we went to DC, I said, well, we should try to meet for lunch, because you won't have to go down until the evening. And so I picked Old Ebbitt Grill. And that's why I can't wait to hear that podcast tomorrow with Leah Heslin. I mean, I've told that story to 100 people. I could have picked 1,000 restaurants in DC. I could have been seated 5 booths away from her station at Ebbitt Grill. I never would have met her. And so I picked that because it's a real nice restaurant, and it's always filled with people, and it's lively. It wasn't until I kept thinking, what can I bring her? I can't bring her flowers. That's really lame. I want to bring some kind of gift. And about a week and a half before, I said to my wife, I think I'm gonna, because I took out my map one night and I totally unfolded it. And I realized that the whole back section, that's not the section, my section is this. This is the siege on 861 and all these target numbers. But the other side was really, except for a little bit of dirt and dust, it was pretty pristine. And that's why I said to Joan, can you cut this out for me? She said, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to give it to Lori. She said, how? I said, well, I'm going to put it in a folder. And she said, you're insane, Dennis. You're not going to put it in a folder. I mean, so you got to have it matted and framed. And she said, what colors? And, I said, well, he was a Navy corpsman. She said, okay, we'll mat it with blue and gold. And I watched her cut it out. And then we took it to the place in another town, and they did the work for us. And I really felt like I wanted to give Lori something that was more meaningful than anything else I could do. And that seemed the best way to do it.
How hard was it to get that? You're in Connecticut, right? How hard was it to get that framed map from Connecticut to DC in one piece?
No, I carried it with me when we met at Ebbitt Grill. I brought it down in the car with my buddy Steve. We had it in the car. So we drove down on Monday, and I actually met a former student at the Marine Corps Museum on Monday morning. And then we drove up to the wall at noontime. And and when we were going down the New Jersey Turnpike, I played Lori's podcast for Steve. He was driving, but that whole, whatever that length of time was, 40 minutes, was absolute silence, except for an occasional this by both of us. And then, so I knew I was going to give it to her. I was going to hand it to her. I didn't have to mail it to DC. I brought it with me.
Got it.
And I know it meant a lot to her. I probably can't even understand how much, but it meant a lot to me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that often gets overlooked, right? We often talk about what a gift means to the person receiving the gift, but the giving of the gift is oftentimes really, really profound and meaningful. I mean, and this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and it was like, I want to give it to her, and then when she opened it up after Leah left, and I was recovering from her, when I handed it to her, she opened up the gift. Joan had wrapped it up nicely, and then she was showing it to Eric, and then she said something to me about, so is this a photo of your map? And I said, no, it's not. And then I took out the map, and there was a hole in it. I said, we cut it out of the map. So you have the real map underneath that glass, something like that. So, yeah, it was pretty magical. And I thought, it is the best gift I can give this woman who wrote this fabulous book about her mother and her father, and their time together. And I thought, there's nothing else I can give her better than this.
So Lori, do you mind, can we rewind? And I mean, I'd love for you to walk me through what you remember of that lunch.
Sure. Eric and I got there a little early, and I had no idea, right, what Dennis really looked like. We found a booth, and you just don't know what to expect, right? We had spoken on the phone, as you know, we communicated via a message, but here comes he and his friend in, and I don't know which one's him and which one's his friend. I mean, I truly don't even know that at that point in time, right? And Dennis seemed nervous. I don't know if he was, but I just remember thinking, I mean, I had no idea he had brought a gift, right? I just remember thinking, what a privilege, right? That this stranger would care to go to so much effort, right? I mean, he was, on the phone, and here's where we're going to go, and just so much effort that he had put into it. So he sits down, and if I remember correctly, I think some water got spilled, and that instantly like took you to this moment of like, humans, like there's just nothing about any of us that's that great or special, right? We're all basically the same, and I think we kind of laughed, and it just sort of broke the ice, if you will, of we're just people. And so I don't know if he ordered, I think he ordered, but he had this beautifully like wrapped gift. And my love language is words of affirmation. So you can ask anybody. I'm not a big gift person, mostly because I think we have everything we need. And I don't think there's anything that we truly need that, like when my granddaughter comes home from school and says, Grammy, I made you a dolphin, right? And she gives me a picture of a dolphin, and on the back, it says, I love you, G-A-M-E, Gammy, there's nothing that I love more than that. Or when my kids were young and they would make me a homemade card, or my husband, came to my office the other day and left this sweet little note on my computer, right? Those gifts matter to me. But those gifts are hard to give to someone that you don't know, right? This is a stranger in every sense of the word, except for a few phone calls and some texts. And I love flowers, by the way, so flowers are sweet, but never would I have dreamed that in this box was something so meaningful to him. Right. I talked to John Edwards, who was a Vietnam veteran who got his map home. And I sat with John Edwards at his home in California, and he showed me his original map. And I remember thinking, oh, one day I hope John will leave that map for me somehow. Right. John had no children. And I thought, oh, if he would just tell whoever is going to be with him at the end, if Lori could just have that, because that map, go back to that original story. This alleged story of my dad looking at a map with the captain, right? So the map had significance early on. The map was a piece of the story, though not true. It led me to all these other pieces. And so I remember like just astonishment that I am holding. I mean, I knew right away what it was, right? This map has meaning for me for many reasons. One, was it true that the captain was looking at the map? Yeah, we now know it's true. The captain, and Dan Wazolik, right? They were looking into the XO, the CO, and Lieutenant Dan Wazolik were looking at the map. It wasn't the corpsman, it was this lieutenant from 3rd Platoon. So we know that that's a significant piece of the story. And so I go back with John Edwards, July of 2019, and John has his original map. The map he showed me in California, he has with us on Valentine's Ridge. And then John goes back to the van, and my son and I are trying to find the place where my dad was killed without the map, right? We had no ability with which to do that. And so here now, I don't have to think about John Edwards' map. John Edwards passed away last January 10th, and forever those memories will be implanted in my heart. And I don't have his map, and I have no idea where his map is, and somebody maybe didn't even know what it was, and it could be not even around anymore. But now I have not only my map, because it was gifted to me, but here's this kind man who gave up a piece of his map, right? It's like someone that would gift you a kidney. It seems similar to that to me, right? That he didn't have to. I would have never had the thought about it. It wasn't like I would have ever thought, well, man, I wish he would have shared his map with me. I mean, that would never cross my mind. Right. And so this now obviously is beautifully framed and sets on our entertainment center, right, in our family room, and will forever be with me. A piece of my dad's history, not my dad's map, but the part of the map that shows where his body lay for 21 days and where I am convinced most of his body remained, right? A part of that ridge forever.
I feel like I mean, I can't speak for what it feels like for you, but for me as an outside observer, it's richer somehow that the map you have is not the one that belonged to your father. It's the one that belonged to somebody else who fought there and who heard your father's story and was so moved by it that he gave you his map. That's almost more profound in a way, in terms of the echoes of your father's story.
Absolutely more profound. Like, if my husband gave me a kidney, he'd be like, oh, that's really sweet. But this is a Vietnam veteran who has no reason to be connected to the story, except for whatever reason it moved him in a way that he and I now have this connection that there's almost no words to really describe.
And the kidney analogy metaphor is like, okay, or example rather, but when I was watching Joan cut the map out, I felt like part of me was getting cut out. Not that I ever used that side of the map, I didn't. I was 10 miles as the crow flies away from Kalu and Valentine Ridge. But it was still my map. There were two pieces that I had scotch taped together. And again, when we got there and we were settled in, I only used one half of the map. And even then it was folded up a couple of times. So I never saw I never was near that area in Kalu.
But as you said, it's still your map and you had kept it 50 years. So it meant something.
Oh, absolutely. I have started to put a few things down in writing. I don't know whether I'll ever get that far, but I feel like the map and I are the same. We're both old. We're both wrinkled. We have lots of wrinkles and folds and soft tissue instead of real healthy skin. And it's the map. The map is me and I'm the map. And the grid squares are really significant because they're 1,000-meter grid squares, and not every grid square had action or danger necessarily, but the ones around 861 certainly did, and certainly the grid squares around on Valentine Ridge did. I would like to say I thought about it for a long time and decided I would do it. It was like spontaneous. One night I was up and I unfolded this for the first time in a long time. I totally unfolded it, and what I kept thinking as I unfolded it, and now let me go back, because I saw in the book Laurie had reproduced part of the map. When you get through the book, and I thought, oh my God, I hope she doesn't have, and then I opened up that back sheet, which has no markings on it at all. And I said, okay, let me figure out the grid squares. Let me figure them out. Boom, boom, boom. There it is. I mean, it would have been disappointing if I thought, oh my God, they're in the next quadrangle over, you know.
Right.
But they weren't. Valentine Ridge was on that back half, so I knew I could do it.
And what you see in the book, this is to me pretty incredible. Number one, that John Edwards got his map home, right? I don't know how many Vietnam veterans brought their maps home, but John drew a cross. So what you'll see in the book, there is an actual cross that John drew on his map to show where the bodies of my dad and the others were killed, the ones around him. So the few around him, right? And so when what I needed to do, I thought, was to go to Vietnam and find the spot, right? There's a connection to the body, regardless of what we want to say, all right, about our earthly bodies and our spirit and heaven, and I get it. My dad's body was just this earthly shell, but there's a connection to the body that matters. And I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to climb Valentine's Ridge, obviously not by myself because I didn't know where I was going, but I wanted to climb that ridge the first time we went, December 2018. And I wanted Eric and Jerry and Mary to just leave me alone and let me lay there, right? Because to this little girl, who I know is now 55, there is still a part I can't reconcile about my dad's body being left there for 21 days. Let alone, did he know he was dying? What was his last thoughts? You know, did he suffer? Was he in pain? All of those thoughts, all of those things are happening in one's tiny little point on this map. You know, I can't go to the crash site, if you will, and try to feel close to my dad there. There's I don't even think there's much of him in his grave here in Marion, Indiana. The place where his body lay is I promise you, I've never felt a connection to him like I did the 2 times I was on Valentine's Ridge. There is something about that space for me. There is something about that location for me. It's like his body I know it's decomposed. I found flowers there and took them home with this thought of, okay, as his body decomposed, life has grown from that. All of those things bring some comfort to me. And this map is a physical picture of that place, a place I would visit often if it wasn't in another continent.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about the map on page, it looks like 373, right? That's the John Edwards map that he marked up for you.
Yes, and it still had dirt on it, you know, and I knew it was like there in that battle, but I would never ask John Edwards for his map, ever. Sure. I would never ask anybody for anything. I have trouble asking for help at all. But I didn't have to ask Dennis for anything. Dennis, on his own, thought of a perfect gift to someone who's not even a big gift person. I think that's pretty significant, right? So that he would move my heart in that way.
How much of that kind of washed over you in the moments after you opened the gift, and how much of it came later?
Oh, so much later, because I don't do much in the moment. Like I am pretty good at concealing my emotions really well. I think I had to, growing up. And so you didn't see much that, I don't think. I mean, Dennis, your memories probably, you could see my face, but I'm sure that I was thankful. But the significance of the gift came with that private time, right? Where I could just let the emotions be present.
Yeah. I do remember that because it was only a booth for the 4 of us. It wasn't like we were taking extra seats, and so I was right across from you, and Eric was across from my buddy Steve. And then when I gave it to you, you took a while to open it up. So that's how women wrap stuff up. And then I want to see this map. Then you showed it to Eric and said something about, is this a picture or this is a picture? And then when I said no, and then you stood up and I stood up and we hugged for a second. Mm-hmm. And I thought, yeah, this will have some, I knew it would have an impact. I honestly did. I was a Fort observer. I dealt with maps. I dealt with the land. I always knew exactly where I was every day in Vietnam for 13 months. I knew where I was. A lot of people didn't, they're just following the guy in front of them. They just, when are we going to stop? I don't know. And I always knew where we were going to stop. And so the map becomes part of me, and I'm part of the map. And my experience was different than your dad, but I also dealt with corpsmen. I mean, one of the corpsmen was Malcolm Mole, and he died that I was the last person, my radio operator and I were the last person to talk with him 2 minutes before he died on the opening night of the siege. And then his replacement was killed a week later, I think, Kristen Fight. And so I always have this affinity for corpsmen, and we give the Navy guys a hard time. We really do, but we love our corpsmen. And so I love the corpsman's wife, and I love the corpsman's daughter. And I'm glad to be part of that story because it just resonated. And I guess for me, it was, what are the odds that I'm going to meet you and then have this other experience, which is going to be a podcast tomorrow. And then that you're going to do, then I learned from you, Michael, that we're going to do a relook. And I feel really honored and pleased to be able to be part of it.
Yeah, that was one hell of a lunch for you, man. That was between Lori and Leah. You got a lot of my job done for me at that lunch. And what I have to say, one of my just enormous regrets is, and I don't want to be too presumptuous, but I was scheduled to be in DC for that event, and I think there's a pretty good chance I might have been invited to that lunch.
Yeah, you would have been invited.
You
would have been there.
And my mother ended up being hospitalized, so I went to South Carolina instead of DC.
Yeah, that was the only bad feeling of that whole time I was down there, that you weren't.
Yeah, man, I really wanted to be there. That would have been so incredible to just, to be able to see all of that myself and just experience all that, all the richness of that moment, But I appreciate the two of you being willing to, to revisit that and to try and describe something indescribable, months later.
When we came out of the restaurant and I shook hands with Eric and Steve, and then Lori and I hugged a little bit, and I kissed her on the cheek, and we were going to meet, and then we were going to see each other that night because she was scheduled to read her dad's name, and I was going to read some names around that time period. And then they headed off in another direction, and we were walking down the sidewalk. We didn't say anything for 100 yards, and Steve said, "You look like you're floating in the air." And I said, "Yeah, I feel like my feet aren't even making contact with the ground. I'm just so pleased and happy." And that summed it up for me. I just thought, I'm so glad I did what I did, but I'm so glad that podcasts allowed us to meet. And that's pretty remarkable story in its own right. That's the scoop.
Yeah.
And then that night, and Laura, she brought the frame map with her to the tent where you pick up your paperwork, and that's where we posed for the picture of the two of us with the map.
Yeah, that's a beautiful moment.
I wanted Mary and Jerry to meet him, right? So that evening, I remember Dennis saying, "Oh, I'll be there. Like, you're reading your dad's name. Doesn't matter if I'm reading around that time. I will be there." So Dennis video recorded, right, when Jerry and I read my dad's name and the 30 men that we were assigned to. And then Eric and Mary, Jerry's wife, read the other 30 names after us. And so I just wanted Jerry and Dennis to meet each other, right? And so I brought it and told that story because I think connections, I really think they matter. And here are these two Vietnam veterans whose stories were completely different, but were connected to me in a way that I felt it was just very appropriate for them to also become connected. So
it was an honor to meet him. It was an honor, really, because I know he's part of the book, and that picture that he identified, I don't forget that. It's pretty amazing. And then we were going to meet in the morning because I was scheduled to read one more time on Wednesday morning. But some of their party headed for the Smithsonian, and then Steve and I really had to get going. We're going to deal with the New York City rush hour if we don't. And we were on text or calling back and forth, and she said, we're on the way. And I said, we just left. So we didn't get to see each other on Wednesday. So, but when I look back on it now, right outside Everett Grill, that's where we said goodbye, but it's not a permanent goodbye. So.
Have you been in touch with each other since then?
Just a little bit. I'm going to try to get her to come to a Vietnam veterans thing here. There's a veterans coffee house that they run in Wallingford, Connecticut. It's just, and they have speakers. I've spoken a bunch of times. They're tired of hearing me, I think. But it's the logistics are that they do it only on Tuesdays. They did it in my town, Cheshire, as well as Wallingford. And Cheshire was always on Wednesday, but Cheshire's no longer doing it. And Tuesdays, we watch our two grandkids from our youngest boy, Devin. We watch their two kids on Tuesdays. So, I mean, they had a speaker today in Wallingford that I really wanted to hear this morning at 11 o'clock. But I can't leave Joan with two kids for that much time. They're 100 miles an hour, those two kids. So.
But that's what the fall I hope will be. So I hope to pick the book tour back up. And so I'm always open to anybody that wants to invite me to come and do a Vietnam Veteran Spotlight. So I'm calling them Author Talk, Book Signing / Vietnam Veteran Spotlight. So I'm heading to Lafayette here shortly, and we're going to spotlight Stan Burkhardt, a Vietnam veteran from that area. So would love to go to Dennis's state and area and spotlight whomever he thinks would be a good 2 or 3 veterans to talk that day. I share part of the book, I read part of the book, and then I give them time to talk as well.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dennis, if you are able to get Lori on the agenda in Wallingford, sometime this fall, I will personally pay for a sitter so you and Joan can go and enjoy that. That'll be my gift. Gift giving ring, right?
But I think that the gift of this sounds cheesy, the gift of love, right? As I've thought about my dad's book, two hashtags have resonated with me. So Larry's legacy of love, Marty's undying love, Marty being my mom. I think those two things summarize the book pretty well. And I think that Dennis, without any conscious awareness of that, has also joined that equation, if you will. So Dennis's gift of his map, right? What an act of kindness. What an extension of love. It just doesn't get much better than that.